How you doing? Well, you hitchhiking the galaxy too? I think you're gonna need these. So welcome to Hitchhiking the Galaxy, and I'll be your host. And today we're gonna go through the long journey of Arthur inside of the amazing omnibus, Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, and the 4 other works created by Douglas Adams. So, before we get on to it, let me just tell you that yes, I will be going over all 5, including the tribute one made by his widow. And going through all of that, I'd like to tell you that I'm going to try not spoil anything as we go through everything, but as we get down to it, I'd like to really emphasize how funny I find some of his writings to be. So why don't you come along with me, and we'll go talk about them. How to leave the planet. Number 1. Phone NASA. Their phone number is 713-483-3111. Explain that it's very important that you get away as soon as possible. Number 2. If they do not cooperate, phone any friend you may have in the White House, 202-456-1414, to have a word on your behalf with the guys at NASA. 3. If you don't have any friends in the White House, phone the Kremlin. Ask the overseas operator for 0107-095-295-9051. They don't have any friends there either, at least none to speak of, but they do seem to have a little influence, so you may as well try. Number 4, if that also fails, phone the Pope for guidance. His telephone number is 011-39-6-6982. And I gather his switchboard is infallible. Number 5. If all of these attempts fail, flag down the nearest passing flying saucer, and then explain to them carefully that you need to go as soon as possible before the phone bill comes. And inside of the foreword, Douglas Adams starts the story thusly. In this universe, The Hitchhiker's Guide is more than just a book. You see, it's the one that we are reading, but in this universe, it is a codex for every budgetary interstellar traveler. And if that happens to be you, come on down to our very near office on Earth. You see, we can change everything about your life, and everything including up to your name, just from a couple of things that we've learned at our time in the Interstellars. You see, come on down. As we start the story, there are very many things going through our head. Like, what is the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy? Who are going to be our main characters? And most importantly, are there going to be any really funny jokes? And as we answer this, some stories start with our place in the universe, inside the Milky Way galaxy, zooming in, telling us the entire story of a man pinned to a cross, asking if we could all just get along, and a woman having the same idea later, and thinking, well, no one has to get nailed. And in this story we find out exactly where we are. A beautiful little home in Edinburgh, owned by a particular man named Arthur. Minutes before it's about to be destroyed by a man named Mr. L. Prosser. So as Arthur storms out of his house and confronts Mr. L. Prosser, he sees giant bulldozers acclaimed, and after talking with him, learning that Mr. Prosser is going to get through his house one way or another, Arthur's friend, Ford Prefect, he decides to waltz on up, and because of this, he tells Arthur everything he needs to hear. Your house doesn't matter. Come with me to the pub. You and I, we have business to do. Sir, Mr. Foreman, if you could tear down his house later when we come back, that would be perfect. And of course, Mr. L. Prosser loves this, so he just decides to let them go. And as they walk away for a couple of minutes as Arthur's in a stupor, wondering if it actually worked, bulldozers start up in the distance and tear down his house. So as Arthur and Ford move along to the pub, we find out the real reason that Ford is so fine with Arthur's house being torn down. Ford says, "You see, the Earth's actually gonna get destroyed in about 30 minutes. Yeah, come with me. Why don't we have a drink? Arthur, exasperated by his clearly unwell friend, decides to go with him. So as they got to the pub, you would not see anyone more merry than Ford Prefect. As he slaps a 20 down onto the table, he asks, "Could we get 4 pints, please? No time like the present. The world's gonna end soon." And as he says this, the bard goes dead quiet. And Arthur has to say, "He's just joking, he's joking." So as Ford and Arthur get down to their table, sit down, they start to speak candidly. Arthur, saddened by the destruction of his house, and Ford, finally telling him, after 7 years, that yes, he is an alien, and yes, he is trying to leave the planet, and yes, the planet's going to explode in about 12 minutes. Arthur and Ford start chugging like mad lads, and Arthur, while commenting, it might be a little bit early, he's a little bit more distressed about his friend. And as they finally finish these 4 beers, Ford says, "Alright, thank you very much. And the world is ending, by the way." Takes out his wallet, gives him all the cash inside of it, and keep the change. Ford and Arthur decide to fuck off from the pub. We see Ford finally pull out the title book, The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, and from it, we learn about the whole reason why everyone loves towels so goddamn much. Mostly because they have a great practical value, and because you can wrap it around you for warmth on the cold moons of Jaglin Beta. Right there. There are a great many values for a towel, and for our next item, the sub-ether communicator array. You see, with it, our friend, Ford Prefect, is finding many different places to go, which is to say nowhere. He's finding one mothership placed right over England, and in that time, it speaks thusly. "You all are being destroyed to create room for an intergalactic space highway. If you had a problem with it, you could have checked out the documents 50 years ago when they were recorded." And so, as this alien ship decides to boom out with voices, predominantly probably throughout the entire Earth, Ford and Arthur decide to use that sub-ether communicator and hitchhike onto a ship. And just as soon as they do, the Earth is destroyed. Somewhere 500,000 light years away on the other spiral arm of the galaxy is Zaphod Beeblebrox. We see Zaphod zooming across the surface of Daggeron. We see that he has 2 extra appendages for his arms and a tiny extra head that's almost wafting around like a prehensile. A man who is, well, just crowned king of the universe. So as Zaphod Beeblebrox speeds towards the Heart of Gold, a new experimental ship with a warp drive created from improbability, he speeds along with his new girl, Trillian. She's more interested in the ships than anything else. So as Zaphod and Trillian get to the cockpit of the Heart of Gold, Zaphod finds himself about to steal it. And so he does, and they hit the buttons, and there they go. Into the wild blue yonder, they find themselves somewhere completely different. So as Ford and Arthur are teleported onto this Vogon ship, they find themselves in the maintenance closet. Cold, Arthur wraps Ford's towel around him. Ford, finding out exactly where we are, hands the Hitchhiker's Guide to Arthur and says, Vogons. And as the book tells him exactly about Vogons, so the funny thing about the Vogon ship is that they actually subjugate many different species through bureaucracy. And this one, their chefs that were on board, which was another subjugated alien race, were the most fantastic cooks in the universe. And, well, they had to make a subjective dish that the Vogons had liked, and well, they'd failed, and subjected their entire race into slavery. So, as pranks, they decide to let hitchhikers come onto the Vogon ships so they can see the captain's face as there's a little bit of disarray in their ships. Just a hint, the captain knows they're there. Here's what to do if you want to get a lift from a Vogon. Forget it. Not actually evil, but bad-tempered, bureaucratic, officious, and callous. They wouldn't even lift a finger to save their own grandmothers from the ravenous bug-bladder beast of Troll without orders signed in triplicate, sent in, sent back, queried, lost, found, subjected to public inquiry, lost again, and finally buried in soft peat for 3 months and recycled as firelighters. The best way to get a drink out of a Vogon is to stick your finger down his throat. And the best way to irritate him is to feed his grandmother to the ravenous bug-bladder beast of Troll. Been there, done that, am I right? On no account allow a Vogon to read you poetry. And with all these beautiful things said by the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, we finally figure out why the Vogons are so bad. So Arthur and Ford scramble to make their way out of this maintenance/galley cabin, and after shooing away a guard, they find themselves a little bit trapped. And so as they find themselves trapped, and as they're scrambling around in the cabin, they finally start to hear the voice of the Vogon captain. And even though Arthur can't understand, Ford puts a fish in his ear that lets him understand not only the Vogon dialect, but every dialect. And with that, we finally understand that the Vogon captain is here to throw them overboard. As the captain finishes expositing about why, because of a love affair, and how he isn't happy no one is going to be, and how all planetary and vacational leave is cancelled, we hear from Ford and Arthur talking about the fish that he just placed in his ear, also known as the babblefish. And as the Hitchhiker's Guide decides to exposit on the babblefish, we find out more about it. How it laughs in the face of God, saying that it proves that God does not exist, but then God comes back and said, "Ooh, I got you, because that means I do exist." So with that, it turns itself into a turmoil that lasts paradoxically forever, as it is. Arthur starts to think about how the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy has everything on it, and everything that was Earth, before it blew up. So what exactly does it have to say about it? And as Arthur opens it up, it says, "Mostly harmless," with the addition of notes from Ford Prefect. Thanks, Ford. Keeping it hot. Ford and Arthur are having a little tiff in the cabin. There comes a knock at the door. It's the Vogon captain, and he's decided that he wants to read them some poetry. "O fuddled grunt bugly, thy micturations are to me as plorred gabble chalkage." And as we go on for a Vogonity, Ford and Arthur make up some way and some reason how any of that could have been good. And as the captain knows they're lying, he decides to throw them out of the airlock anyway. And as Ford and Arthur try to come to senses with the guard, the guard decides that he just wants to be a guard and he doesn't want to get in trouble. So he puts them in the airlock, and Ford's final plan is to live. So they get cast out into space. Did you know your body can last 30 seconds before dying in space? Let's see if someone try that out, huh? Ford and Arthur are floating through space. Arthur can only think of one thing: a girl named Trisha McMillan that, he fancied at a party only a couple of years ago. And, it didn't end too well with her, but he always wondered what could have been. And in the Heart of Gold, as Zaphod Beeblebrox and Trillian are traveling around, they find themselves in Sector plural Z Alpha, which is also known as where planet Earth would be. How improbable. But in that, it seems that they've also picked up a couple of hitchhikers. So as Ford and Arthur are swept up into an even more improbable sight, they're on the boardwalk in Edinburgh. Except the waves aren't waving. The buildings are. And as they look off more into the distance, well, they see many more improbable things going on. And in that moment, Ford becomes a penguin. His limbs shorten. He starts to create a beak for himself. And he just anamorphs into a penguin. Thankfully, he can still think. And Arthur looks behind a door, and he sees an infinite number of monkeys with an infinite number of typewriters. Neat. And apparently they want to talk to us about their script of Hamlet. So as they decide to hold off and fight off the madness that's around them, getting covered in molasses and even almost seeing a whale fall on top of them, they start to realize normal, as the computer starts to shout out the ratios of normality, going from exponential numbers down to a 1-to-1 ratio. What is normal anyway? Says the computer before finally Ford and Arthur are alone in a room. Ford is no longer a penguin, his appendages have lengthened again, and Arthur, well, he doesn't have to fight back any monkeys, and they aren't covered in molasses anymore. So, with that, this is Marvin, the depressed robot, a being so smart that, well, when they created the Heart of Gold, they thought it would need an infinitely smart companion that would along with it. And, well, now he's just fucking depressed, dude. Why would y'all do that to him? Why'd you even give him emotions? That was fucked up. Like, take the emotions out of that motherfucker. He's so sad. Anyways, as Marvin leads him to the cockpit, Ford and Arthur remark about how lucky they were to actually be saved and, well, not die in the vacuum of space. And as they get to the front, well, Ford and Arthur are met with a man only known as Zaphod Beeblebrox. So as Ford Prefect, the man who was named after the most popular car in England finally remembers his roots as Praxabeetlix, seeing none other than his brother, Zaphod Beeblebrox, and they heartily embrace, hug each other, and, well, catch up from old times. As Arthur remarks that Pete stole his girlfriend last time he came to Earth, telling her that she could come along on his ship. And finally, Trisha McMillan, Trillion, comes out and says, well, he wasn't lying about the ship. Australians, am I right? So as they all settle down, Trisha, Ford, Arthur, and Zaphod, they all figure out that Earth has been destroyed. Trisha McMillan can't even believe it. Arthur's only coming to terms, and, well, Ford is just glad to be off that fucking planet. So with this, Zaphod remarks that maybe we should all get some rest. So from that, everyone decides to go rest from a very exciting day, and as they all lay down to sleep, they just continue contemplating. The next morning, as Arthur wakes up and asks the computer for tea, the computer is having a little bit of a struggle, so he decides to go to the cockpit as it's loading and see what they can do. And at this point, everyone else is in the cockpit, including Marvin, as they all begin to speak about Magrathea, the most beautiful and, yes, the most wealthy planet in the entire galaxy. Magrathea was a folk tale at this point, only being brought up by Zaphod and being struck down by everyone else who knew anything about intergalactic politics. You see, Magrathea had never been discovered by anyone, and in the unlikely chance that it would be found, well, it's very unlikely that anyone could get near it. So let me tell you a little bit about how the improbability drive was made. Through the entirety of the improbability drive's making, there were the world's best physicists, psychiatrists, everyone with a STEM degree working on this impossible drive. And then, one night, after hours, a pre-med student came in and solved the problem, saying that this problem was impossible, only solving it through putting in 2 negative ones on each side of the equation. And as they solved it, the words had erased from the board and created the heart of gold. The improbability drive made completely of gold, and that appeared to be just like a gold brick. The next day, that pre-med student was lynched because every other person didn't like being outshined, and the only thing that they hated more than that was an asshole and a know-it-all. I think the improbability drive fucked up the probabilities of the actual world that they live in. It's pretty improbable. They used to have numbers about how improbable this is. Now we don't even talk about it. So as they get in front of Magrathea, Zaphod Beeblebrox exclaims, "Hey yo, I finally did it!" And as the rest are dumbstruck and dumbfounded, the computer goes back to its original plan of making hot tea. So Zaphod Beeblebrox decides to manually control the ship into Magrathea, activating the defense systems of Magrathea to 1,000,000-year-old 2-megaton nukes. And the computer was too busy to enable autopilot. So as 2 missiles come barreling at the heart of gold, with everyone else panicking, Arthur decides to hit the improbability drive. And with that, everyone improbably lands on the surface of Magrathea, with 2 items hitting it harder than the rest. 1 giant whale and another bowl of petunias. With the bowl of petunias only thinking, "Not again," and the whale only coming to existence for the first time, wondering about its new friend, the ground. So as our main characters all decide to walk around the crater formed by the whale and the whale chunks, they find out that the atmosphere is very thin, so that they would have to yell at each other in order to actually speak. And as that happens, a storm rolls in. Arthur and Marvin are left in the dust, as our other 3 main characters, Trillian, Ford, Zaphod, all trek forward trying to find a temple. The one that Zaphod is talking about. So Zaphod, Trillian, and Ford make it to this temple, finding an old ruin. They step into a couple of rooms and get trapped, collided in between 2 stone walls that keep them there now. So, as Zaphod and the rest of the crew are trapped inside of these walls, Zaphod takes his prehensile head and he decides to take off a portion of it. And he says, "I actually only decided to come here because I was told to. By ZB. Zaphod Beeblebrox." So it's now confirmed that Zaphod Beeblebrox has committed his own brain surgery in order to forget whatever negative intentions he had at the beginning of his presidency. Just then, the walls spew gas, and Zaphod says, "I'll tell you why I did it later." So as Marvin and Arthur are sitting there, behind the pack, Marvin decides to power down. And Arthur meets a strange man, who comes up to him on a speeder bike. So as this strange hermit takes Arthur back to his house, he explains many different things about this used-to-be beautiful world of Magrathea. they decided to put themselves in forced cryostasis, waiting for the next global boon, where everyone could afford their prices. And what they sold was planets. Entire planets that they would create and hand make and sculpt for whatever purpose that the user liked. And so Arthur asks, "What's your name? How do you know all this?" The only thing the old hermit can muster to say is, "My name is Slarty Bartfarst." "Come with me," says Slarty Fart. "Come with me," says Slarty Bartfarst. "I'll show you to what you were really meant to do." And so as they get on this platform that's floating, it begins to move as they start to go through the planet. And in this darkness, they start to see all of these different projects and planets made, and all of these different models of their different planets. You see, the last one is Earth. Or, at least it looks like Earth, says Slarty Bartfarst. This is Earth 2. You see, Earth 1, well, it was destroyed only mere minutes before its entire purpose was realized. And you, Arthur, have it. You have what they want. And Arthur says, "Who?" And Slarty Bartfarst says, "The rats.
Rats.
The ones who created your planet." And with some confusion, Arthur tries to talk about the mazes that, humans would do on them to learn more about themselves.
Rats.
So with all of that being said, Slarty Bartfarst takes Arthur to the rats.
Where the rats.
And Trillion, and Ford, and yes, Zaphod Beeblebrox, as they're all sitting around for a very nice dinner. And throughout this dinner, well, the topic for the matter is the question of the universe. For we already know the answer, it's 42. And the reason we know this is because millions of years ago, the rats found out, just like everyone else, the answer to the universe. You see, there was the third smartest computer in the world that said that I am not smart enough to answer this question. Make the next one. So they made the second smartest one in the universe. I will spend all of my time finding out the answer to the universe to screw over lawyers, philosophers, and everyone else who would stop me from answering this question. And millions of years later, as they have all put themselves in cryostasis, and they learn from the second computer what exactly the answer is. The answer to life. 42. But the computer admonishes them for not knowing the question, and that they will have to make the smartest computer in order to find that question. And that computer was named Earth. It was started by the rats, and yes, Arthur has the question. The rats would like to know more than anything else what exactly Arthur's question is. So they've decided to take out his brain and research it. And as the crew decides that that might not be favorable for our monkey, as Zaphod says, Trillion and Ford decides that they don't want their friend to be, well, neutered, and they don't want a new robot friend that looks exactly like him. So they'll just take their leave, and as the rats turn into this giant blob, as many more rats start filling the room, and they start to create this serpent-like creature, the entire group decides to flee back to the Heart of Gold that's been ferried there by Marvin, and find themselves in the cockpit, with Zaphod saying, "Does anyone want to grab a bite to eat? I'm famished. Let's go to the bite at the end of the world." And with that, we'll come back next time with the meal at the end of the world. Come back again, we'll hitchhike soon.